Phil, just in a couple of minutes, could you introduce yourself? What's your background? Where are you? You're in the UK, and what are you doing with AI and L&D?
Yeah, thanks, Don, and morning, everyone. I just very much enjoyed watching everybody's weather updates. As a Brit, I'm very interested in the weather. Apparently, it's in our genes because our life has depended on farming for so long. This is why we talk
Really?
about weather all the time. But that's an aside. But yeah, good morning, folks. I'm Phil. I'm in very sunny, as I say, disconcertingly sunny Hebden Bridge, up north. And I am very excited to speak with you about what I do every day, which is research into. Fundamentally, I'm interested in how we can connect research, so our understanding of how humans learn, specifically how they develop new capabilities and behaviors, how they get better at their job, basically. There's an awful lot of research on that, and I've been doing a lot of research in that space myself now for 20 odd years because I'm very old. And more recently, I guess throughout that time, I have been asking the question, okay, what does exceptional L&D look like? And I've been thinking about that. And one great kind of mental model to have in mind today for the conversation is I think about that as a process, because I like to organize things in my brain. So analysis, how do we know what's the problem that we're trying to solve? Basically trying to define the business problem, and then design. So thinking about, okay, if that's the problem, what's the solution? And I'm also interested in development, so in the actual creation of the build and the delivery of the L&D experience, and of course evaluation. So I've been researching that for many years, but asking all the time if and how technology might be able to help us to achieve optimal practice across those different areas. And the headline has been that technology has actually done very little to push us forwards. This is probably not news to anybody in this virtual room, but I think if anything, the technologies that we have built predominantly over the last 20 years, but it has been, technology has been experimented with in L&D now for 60 odd years, including AI. But what it's tended to do is to scale and shore up a model of L&D, of designing it, delivering it, which is pretty much broken. So I guess I come at this conversation today with, as someone who's worked for many years in L&D, but as a researcher who's interested in understanding what exceptional looks like. And by exceptional, I essentially mean, what can we do to actually do our jobs in the way we want to and to actually impact capability? So what does exceptional look like? And can technology, specifically in the last couple of years or so, AI, help us? So that's me.
That is brilliant. Already in the chat, we've had Didem saying, I'm addicted to Phil's newsletter. It combines research with real life. Somebody said, well, we need a link to it. Andrew dropped it in straight away, and we'll keep that for the end. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Didem, for putting that in. And we'll share the link at the end, because that chat is going to keep flying past. Don't worry, you won't miss it. We're going to have a page at the end where we're just going to have a bunch of resources for you to share. Okay, let's look. You touched really there on the whole setup for our conversation today, which is how can we use the technology we've got effectively, AI in particular, not just in the creation of content, but also in those other things you talked about there, the analysis piece, the design piece. All right. But before we jump into that, let's ask the people in the room a question. And here's the question we'd like to ask you right now, so we get a gauge of what's going on. We've got a lot of people in the room, so I'm expecting this. There's a big box underneath that question. How are you currently using AI and L&D? A big box there. Please answer in that big empty box. So, and Katrina comes out honestly and says, not at all. And that's a quite legitimate answer. And I think actually it's true for most people. And Isael is using it for curating. Julie also not. Talia is saying plenty. Well, Talia, can you give us some details, please? Generating text. Rose, can you tell us what for? Just for voiceover, Chris. Interesting. Writing workshops. What, Caroline? The whole workshop? Sketches of it? Descriptions? Phil, already, what I'm getting from this is a real breadth of range of how people are using AI. Even though I've been doing research into this, like yourself, and looking at how people are using it. It's much wider than I was expecting it. And we've got plenty of people, and thank you for saying that. Honestly, I'm not using it. So we've got plenty of people at the zero, and then right the way across the board, our business has developed an LXP which uses generative AI to design learning programs and curating content, says Darren. That's fairly complex.
Yeah.
Phil, I'm trying to scroll down and make sense of all these as they come through, but is there any theme that jumps out for you in here?
Yeah, and it kind of reflects the theme that I've found talking with lots of L&D folks on the ground and around the world, which is that there is a lot of variety. And the next question then becomes kind of, well, why? And I think one of the patterns that I've seen is that there are various levels of confidence among us people on the ground, which is kind of directly correlates to the amount of support and direction and help that people have got from their leadership. So maybe that's one observation, first of all, is that the cause of this, the reason for varied levels of confidence and experimentation tend to come from clarity from the leadership. Can I use AI? How? What's our strategy? How is this going to help us achieve our goals? People who have clarity on those kind of questions have more freedom to experiment. That's the first thing. I think the other thing that I'm seeing is that, so if let's go back, I think it's only 2 years, isn't it? To when GPT was first released. It feels like forever. End of 2022, I think it was.
Yes.
When everything changed, maybe. But I think back then, almost 100% of the use cases that I saw in L&D for the first 6 months was content creation. Lots of reasons for that. I think in summary, there's two things. One is it's where the pain is. So creating content takes time and money. And generally when we see innovation happening, and this is not just in education, it's just full stop. Innovation happens first where there is money, and there is money where there is pain and high costs. And so to me, it was kind of inevitable that we would see AI, first of all, be used to do what we already do, but faster and cheaper. So we saw lots of generative AI technologies enabling us to create more content more quickly. But what we've seen since then, and especially over the last few months, and I think this was backed up, Don, by the research that you did and the paper that you published, is more experimentation around the edges. And so what we're seeing is there's an emerging kind of bleeding edge of AI in L&D, which is focusing less on the development stage, which I would argue is actually where we can bring least value. Maybe it's where the low-hanging fruit is, and maybe it's where we can feel immediate benefits. So it's easy to make a KPI and measure it. So maybe that's why we're seeing it there. But actually, if we want to step back and have a more substantive impact on basically on how well we do our jobs and how much we impact people, like our employees, we need to experiment at the edges, and we're seeing more of that. So we're seeing more experimentation, as I can see here, with design, with a little bit with analysis, much less with evaluation, because that tends to require, levels of data cleanliness and structure and technology that we just haven't had the time to build yet. So yeah, long story short, I think it remains the case that probably around about 85–90% of use cases are content creation, but we're seeing more and more people using AI as a bit of a sidekick for ideation, creative thinking, and as people are saying here, like rapidly generating outlines. So really getting to a V1 more quickly in the design part, as well as speeding up build.
That's a really good summary of where we've come from and what you've experienced. And there has been this extraordinary shift. I don't have any problem with people using AI to create content, because it's a natural substitution. I've got a tool that does what I'm doing and it helps me do it faster, fine. It's taken a bit of time, at least a year, to get to the stage, as you say, to the point where people are now experimenting, doing other things. And it's quite natural that some people just aren't using it at all. Andrew's created a word cloud, absolutely brilliant, on the fly. I've created a word cloud from the comments. The two main phrases are content and content creation, and the third word in the cloud is not. So there's this people not using it, people are using it for creating. Right, Gabrielle and Joe, I can see who's typing, so I'm just going to say we're going to shift away from having the box with the chat in it. So if you could just wrap up your thoughts in a second, that'd be great. Joe says, I've done Phil's course. all areas of the DOMS model, understanding the learner's writing objectives and creating content. Brilliant. I'm really loving those answers. And you know what? There's so much richness in those answers. We may produce a blog from it later on and share that back with you through Learning Technologies. But Phil, let's come to a straightforward interview bit for about like half an hour. And look, everybody, please put your questions in there. And I see Isael has already put one in. And I'm going to save that one to the end. Will AI replace content instructional designers? All right, I can see the content box, the questions box is going to fill up. I want to drive an interview, a conversation with Phil down some lines that we've already discussed. I think she's already established that she's worth listening to. And we've talked about how people are using AI in L&D now. And it's largely, as you're saying, 80-90% around content creation. But what else then are the edge cases? What's the interesting stuff that people are using it for beyond producing content?
Yeah, and this is where it gets very interesting. I think you've probably heard me say this before. If you do, follow me. So forgive me, but I think it's an important point, is that people often ask me, what's the biggest danger of AI for L&D? And I think they're expecting an answer around like data, around jobs, and those things are very real.
Yeah.
But I think actually fundamentally the biggest risk, if we remove the technology focus a little bit and remove automation, is that it just makes us more effective at doing something that's deeply ineffective.
Yeah.
And that, just for context, is why I think if we're going to really leverage the power of AI, and who knows, I think often the narrative suggests, like the way that people talk about AI suggests that it has its own destiny, and we're just going to watch it and hope for the best that we still have relevance and meaning and value. Entirely not the case. AI is the fate that AI has, the impact that it will have generally, but let's focus on L&D, depends on how we decide to use it. And so if we decide to use it only in this development stage, or even just primarily in this stage, I think it will send us down excuse me, quite a dangerous path. Let's just look at some of the stats. So last year, globally, just over $300 billion was spent on corporate L&D. And that number has risen every year. So we're throwing more and more money at it. The rate of recorded impact on employees on the ground is at best 12%. There's a huge problem here because we don't really know how to measure that number. But where we have measured that number, the report, the employees on the ground are saying, only 12% of them are saying that it's translating into some sort of value. Meanwhile, the lack of quality training remains the number one reason that people leave their jobs. So this is a massive, massive problem. And I think what we need to do is to think about using AI not just to oil the machine that we already have that's delivering, that's costing an awful lot, put loads of money in it and getting nothing really out of the end. Let's not scale that. Let's go to these edge cases, which instead of only automating, first of all, they think about, well, how can we augment? How can AI make us more effective and build the right thing before we go and scale it using generative AI? And so, yes, to get to, sorry, Don, that's my rambling introduction. But
no, you're not rambling at all. You're setting the scene very nicely. If I could summarize what you're saying, AI has been and runs the risk of being a bit like caffeine. And the famous phrase is, the coffee helps you do stupid things faster. And you don't, not designing stuff is stupid, but we don't necessarily want to accelerate the process which we've had in the past, which is around a model, which was when I started training back in the 1980s. You stand up and you deliver stuff because there is no other way of doing it. There are lots of other ways of doing it, and technology can help us with that. We don't have to design to that model anymore. Back to you, Phil.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should say the same big existential crisis question is being presented to higher ed as well. We've really inherited the L&D model from there, and they also are facing these big questions. So what are the edge cases? There's some really interesting stuff going on. I think arguably, if you're going to focus anywhere, and this is another question I get, where should I focus? What should I think about? Analysis. So the very beginning of the process is where right now I think the the AI tools that we generally have access to right now can be most powerful for L&D. I think one of the most wicked problems that we deal with in our world is defining, is it a training? I've been working with so many large corporates recently, and this is fundamentally the question which we still aren't able to answer. So when somebody comes to us with a business problem, for example, I don't know, we're not selling enough stuff, so we need a training on sales.
Yeah.
Sounds very vague, but actually that's quite close to what we tend to be handed from somewhere. Sometimes we're not
Yes,
sure.
definitely.
It's like, well, within, so there is an assumption there, and often we are handed not just a problem but a solution. So it's like, right, sales are low, we need sales training, you've got 3 hours, it's going to be online, we want videos, you've got 300 quid, whatever it is, go. And so we have to go and do it because the time is ticking and blah blah blah. What the question that we don't have time to stop and ask is, like, we don't do problem definition. So why are sales low? And if we just like think about this for 1 minute, there's 20 different reasons sales might be poor. It might be that, you know, the outreach is wrong and we're phoning the wrong people. It might be that the salespeople don't know what the product is well enough, and so they don't have the knowledge, the expertise. It might be that they lack confidence because they're very junior. There's a million different reasons, and therefore a million potential different solutions, some of which are training, some of which are communications. If it is training, those solutions are very different depending on what the problem definition is. And so what we've been experimenting with, we being me and the people who volunteer to research with me, you know, God bless them. We've been thinking about, well, how do we use AI to make problem definition, basically root cause analysis, faster and easier? Because we're not data analysts. We don't do this every day. We're not trained to do this every day. But it really, really matters. And so there's one example of where, just through some basic prompting of GPT-4 or 4.0, we've been able to turn a very high-level business problem into a list of potential root causes. And then from that, using some, you know, expertise, some understanding of how to do root cause analysis and solution definition to spit out, these are the most likely causes, and therefore these are the best fit solutions. And just by doing that, suddenly we're going to avoid this very, very common but very problematic situation where we build the wrong thing.
Well, I very often talk to people, as you do, in different parts of the world, and when you stand on stage and I describe what it's like to be what I call a pizza delivery L&D function, where somebody phones up, they say, I want a 12-inch pizza with anchovies on top, and the only question we're asking is, do you want pineapple with that? That's the sort of level of interaction we tend to have. You're getting all the specification for this. As you know, of course, a problem could be knowledge, it could be skills, it could also equally be motivation, it could be opportunity. There may be somebody's great at their job, but they simply don't care enough about it, or they can't do it because of the way things are set up. Training isn't going to help. So I'll put the link to your blog in there. How do we know if this is a training intervention? I'm just going to throw a question here from Richard Whiteside. From what you're describing, Phil, this sounds like AI could effectively support a move to being performance consultants. Is that something you're describing here?
I think so, and I think actually it's a great question, and it's something that came up in the research when talking with L&D professionals, that basically that our roles are like a Swiss Army knife, and we have 800 different things that we need to be brilliant at in order to execute, and one of them is consulting. You know, one of them is being able to sit down, often with people who are senior in the organization, influential, so people who have requested training, and walk them through the process of understanding what's the change that we want to see, what's the problem that we're trying to solve. And so absolutely yes. And one of the things that I've been working on with some L&Ds or managers, so team managers, is developing some basic prompts to enable more junior L&D team members to be able to define the right questions to ask the stakeholders, to be able to.
So let me just get my head around this. Sorry. So this is almost training junior L&D people to be performance consultants.
Yes, you can use it in different ways. So you can ask AI to make its best guess at what it thinks the root cause will be. That's one option. It's problematic because AI, because data, we can talk about that.
Sure.
So at the moment, in order to eliminate risk but still feel the benefits of AI, we're experimenting with, and again, I think you've linked to it, you just said, Don, but there's a bot that I've built, which is deliberately just to be put out in public.
No, I've linked to the blog. There's
There's a link within the blog
okay.
to this bot, and it's not perfect, and I've just kind of relatively quickly rattled it off, but it's the first step in, yeah, exactly that. And so it's not, the AI is the companion of the user, and it says, right, if that's the high level business problem that you've been given, these are the most likely, there's 12 potential likely causes of this based on what it understands about that problem in that context. And it then coaches you to ask the right questions of the right stakeholders. And it also gives you advice on which data you might look at in order to answer some of these questions and validate which of these hypotheses is the right one. So you're absolutely right, Don. We're using AI to train people to become better consultants, which is, and it's this kind of cyborg, like, co-creation where the human and the AI work together, where at the moment we're finding most value.
I've just dropped the link to the blog post back in there, and also explicitly the link to the bot as well. So it's quite clear to people that you can go and try the bot out. Just to be clear, if people are trying the bot, they're not uploading any data. You're not capturing data from them.
Nope. No, it's just all, and you just add in a very high level. No data is either inputted or saved or anything. It's just a way of, working through potential causes and best fit solutions, and how to push back in a data informed way when we are given the dominoes order. And I think the other thing that I'll say, just technology aside, is one of the biggest, most successful changes that I've made when I've worked with big organizations is just to insist that when people make training requests, they give you business problems, not solutions. So they tell you that they're hungry, not that they want a pizza. And then, life is instantly better. And then you can go about turning that problem into the best fit solution.
Dem says, I've tried it at work, but the resultant solutions might be too hard for the bosses to spend that much time and energy to invest in root cause analysis. They want easy solutions. They want e-learning. So we've got the technology, we can train ourselves, we can be better, we can find the issues, but there's also a cultural issue, isn't there? There's this cultural issue that says, look, I am used to just telling the training department what I want, and I expect to get it. Don't bother me with this fancy root cause analysis stuff. How do you get past that?
Yeah, and it's absolutely the case that the culture, the influencing is maybe the hardest part here.
Yes.
I think I have done research here. I'm actually actively doing it very informally at the moment, because I'm working with a large consumer healthcare company, and we are asking this question. So I'm working with this team of very enthusiastic L&D professionals who want to adopt all of these fantastic evidence-based approaches, but they're finding it hard because of speed, because of budget, etc. The thing that seems to work, and this maybe takes us to the AI as a design assistant part of the conversation. But the thing that seems to be very powerful is using evidence, and there's a ton of research out there. And one of the beautiful things about AI is that it now gives us access to it, where it's been locked away behind, ivory tower paywall.
Yes.
There's some beautiful research out there, which essentially is you can use to say to the leadership, look, if we do it your way, this is the likely return on investment. If we do it this way, this is the likely return on investment, and it's 20% better. And this, because we're using evidence, what I heard back, I actually had a debrief session with them yesterday, because we're using research and examples. The conversation is not like my opinion as Phil, because I'm a learning designer and I want to dabble in a bit of active learning or whatever. I want to design branching scenarios because it's fun and I'll put it in my portfolio. This is me saying, this is the better way. We can go your way, and we can have 3 videos and a quiz, but the return on investment will be X versus Y. And this is something else that I'm experimenting with right now, is like the ability of AI to be able to work with, so to connect to evidence sources. Like consensus is one of them, perplexity is another, elicit is another, but I think now you have to pay for elicit. But to be able to connect to these sources and say, right, what's the optimal way of designing this learning experience? Here's the way that I've been asked to. What's the difference in terms of time, money, people, but return on investment also? And it is able to look at data and to calculate these things. And you can imagine a world in which in the future, you might have an instance of AI for your organization. It can look at your specific data and do all sorts of interesting automated decision making or supported decision making, because it's still up to the human to convince the other human. But just to be able to work in a more data informed way seems to be a really good way of influencing and
Sure.
really taking some power back, I think, as an L&D professional.
That question of power is a really important one. Simon Dewar points out, says, it feels like businesses want learning to direct AI towards doing more of the same old, ineffective nonsense. Content, rather than helping us be better at what we're doing. I think he summed it up very well. Alina points out this is not unique to the UK. Brazil has the same issue. James says, introduce them to the good, fast, cheap triangle. I think that's a good way of looking at it, but if you're not sure what that is, it's the idea that you can make things better, faster, cheaper, and there's always one of those points where you can have an impact on something. The cultural thing is an issue, though, and I think your point about shifting the conversation from being one about the solution, we can do it with a branching scenario, towards one that's the conversation is about the data and the language used in the organization. That shifts people's not just understanding the problem, but also perception of L&D. Suddenly they're using the right language. And this is what Guy Wilmshurst-Smith does at Network Rail, when he's talking about persuading people to spend lots of money on getting people trained to do things on the railway track. And it works because he talks about delay minutes, which is the language of the business. He doesn't talk about certifications. He talks about how many delay minutes they'll save by doing the training. So look, you've talked very, very coherently about this analysis piece. So we can do performance consulting, we do root cause analysis, we can then feed that in. You're describing, just at the end there, before I cut you off with my enthusiasm, you're describing a view of a possible future of AI in L&D, where it's using context data from our organizations in order to suggest how to answer the why. So the analysis piece gives us the what are we trying to do, the why, but the how comes forward. Can you explain a bit more about how you think that could happen ideally, and how you've seen people actually doing it now?
Yeah, sure. And I think when it comes to the how, if we think of like a pre and a post AI world, although that's entirely ridiculous because AI has basically always been around. It's been around as long as like DNA and space travel. But generative AI that we are able as lay people who aren't computer scientists to interact with. In the pre-AI world, and still now, I think in most organizations, when it comes to the how, so for example, I don't know, is it a very expensive in-person event? We're going to spend months organizing it. It's going to be days out of work. It's going to cost tens of thousands of pounds, whatever. Or is it a 10-minute online video-based async course, or everything in between? How do we make that decision about how is something that I've been researching for a long time. And what I found is two things. One is this feeling of like, I don't know. Like if I sit down in a room and ask an L&D professional to walk me through how they make the decision on the how, I hear, I think three things mostly. One is, well, it's already been ordered, a bit like your pizza analogy. It's like they already want deep pan. I won't go too far with this metaphor, but you get what I mean.
No, exactly.
So I'm just putting it in the oven, and I'm just basically an execution gopher.
Yes.
Which is very deeply frustrating for somebody who has come into this industry to make a change. It's like, I'm just executing. The other is that it's a bit of a finger in the wind. So it's like, so I have a feeling that this might be best done probably in person but they can't articulate why, and they have a lack of confidence in why. And then the third response is just, we have just our way of doing it. It's a factory line because it has to be fast. We have our whatever organization's name way, and that's what we do. So everything is pretty consistent. We might have one version for online, one blended, one in person, but I just do the same thing every time. Whereas
copy and paste what you did before, it's the same method,
because it's quick. And this is, I think, another reason that we've ended up with this kind of behemoth, like this massive like L&D machine that's pretty consistent across different organizations, but consistently poor also in terms of cost and impact. Anyway, so if we look at the research, what's really interesting, and like on my bootcamp, this is where people have like this eyes light up moment of like, oh, thank you. It's just a gift, is that we have so much research already to like, there's people in the background doing education, learning research to say, okay, if you want to teach, basically you just need to define what you're trying to achieve and for whom. So if I can turn that problem statement into an understanding of the what and the why, and I say something like, well, I want to develop the confidence of leaders who are relatively new to leadership in order to X, Y, Z, there will be research out there to say, here are the best instructional strategies. If you're doing that, it should be blended, that you need to have some synchronous elements for practice and feedback. And if you do that and not the video-based approach or not the 3 days in a room approach, the ROI will be X, Y, Z. And it won't be numbers, but it will be, the research shows that more people engaged, were retained in the experience, and were observed to change their behavior versus a video-based course. So it's kind of magical.
And this is possible now?
So with AI, I think this is maybe like the thing that I'm most excited about, is that it has sort of broken down this wall between academic research and practice on the ground. I think the problems before now is that you have to pay for it. It's just constant. Like I do a summary every month and a digest of the research, but the research is happening all of the time. So it's hard. It's a full-time job, basically. It's like being a PhD researcher. But what we can do with AI now is we can use these tools like Consensus. I like to use the Consensus GPT within ChatGPT because it seems to perform better conversationally for instructional design, but there's also a separate app. I'm not sponsored by any of these people, by the way. These are just things I've tried and other people have tried in our industry. So Consensus, there's also Perplexity that people may have tried already. The difference between the two is Consensus is only peer-reviewed academic research. Perplexity is that, but with more emphasis also on non-academic but reliable resources, which is a little bit more subjective. But things like Harvard Business Review, YouTube videos that are popular, this kind of thing. The important thing is that both tell you what the sources are, so you can validate them and see. But what they enable us to do is just ask a very basic text-based question, like what is the most effective way to change the behavior of these people in this context to achieve this goal? And there will be research on this, and it not only sources that research and surfaces it, but summarizes it for you. And so very quickly you can start to answer these questions: why this and not this? Not with this feeling of finger in the wind, or because it's what we do, but because it's the thing that's most likely to achieve the goal. And that then gives you the narrative and the confidence that you need to say, this is the answer, or there's these three answers, but this would be my recommendation. And so we can do that now very, very quickly.
Do you think?
Yeah.
Do you think people have the time to do that, though, Phil?
I mean, at the moment,
practically speaking, I mean, it might be. Look, it's better to spend the time doing it to get the right answer. But do people feel they have the time to do it?
No. I mean, one thing that is very clear is that people have no time to do anything. The general breakdown is 10% of time on analysis, 20 on design, 70 on development, execution, doing the thing, making the pizza, and then 0 really on evaluation. So they feel they don't have the time. But if we just rejig that 100% and spend, 20 on analysis, 20 on design, and then the 60 on development if needs be. Although the development, can now be far lower because we have these great AI tools for content. So that's where they do come in. And so it's not necessarily about another job on top. It's about thinking about what you prioritize and why. And it's a bit like if you are on a building site and you only have a month, you are very unlikely to think, well, I've only got a month, so I'm just going to start building now. You will spend the month like building something smaller, but you'll still start with a blueprint and the foundations, because otherwise you're just going to build the wrong thing and it will fall over. And so it's just, I get it, like people are busy, but I think this is an opportunity to be able to better understand what's the best use of my time and to I don't know, accelerate, automate some of those lower value things like the content creation, like the project management, like whatever it is, so that you can focus on these things. So it's hard, but the payback for both your, I think, value and feeling of satisfaction and impact as a professional, but also as a business, like the return on investment is significant. So I think this is an opportunity where we don't have to go to the leadership and say, look, you need to double the length of the process because it's otherwise it's broken. Like they're not interested in that argument. I can confirm that. But if we can say, look, the process is going to stay the same, might even get faster, but we need to change these elements and you'll get this increase in return on investment, then they're excited. So I think that's what's exciting about AI for me is that it can both augment and automate and maybe allow us the time and space to shift those percentages a bit. And I would just say focus as much as possible. I spend like 40-50% of my process time on analysis.
Yeah.
Before I go anywhere near like the shovel and the building site, it's analysis, the design bit. And it's really quick. I mean, we practice this on my bootcamp, but we can identify the best fit instructional strategy and etc. in a 10-minute exercise. And so that's another thing we need to get our head around. Things that used to take months now take minutes. It's kind of wild.
Is it fair to say that we need to have a shift in the culture of the organization to think about learning differently, but we also need a shift in the culture of L&D to think about our own roles differently, that we need to make that shift and spend much more time on analysis, on performance consulting as well, and less time on execution, which we could probably do now if we have the tools to help us?
100%. And I think this is the moment at which, this is just a prediction, but I see lots of patterns in the L&D industry that I saw in the UX industry, maybe about 10 or so years ago. And at that point, UX designers they didn't really have the tools, the technologies that they needed. And so they were designers, but they were also project managers. They were also people who did budgeting and finance and what happened is that became too much, too ineffective, too slow, too expensive. And we saw the introduction of technologies that really enabled UX designers to become the UX designers they are today, where they just focus like 90% of the time on designing the right thing. And I think we will see that in L&D. I hope anyway, I hope that's going to be the impact of AI, is that it enables us almost to professionalize
to
the next level and say, look, we are not video creators, or maybe we are, and that's where we specialize and we become expert in how to use the AI machines that make the great videos, because not all videos are great. Like, that is not a shock to anybody, but yeah, I think this is what I hope, and I think it will require us to. I think generally the impact of AI on humans is going to be that we're going to all become expert in something more niche than we are now.
Yes.
And that for us, for me anyway, it's great news for L&D because it means those who we can specialize in one thing rather than having to be that army, the Swiss Army knife.
Yeah, it may be. I mean, I spend a great deal of my time thinking about this sort of thing and thinking about what does it mean for the profession. Look, we've got a whole rack of questions that are stacking up here. It's brilliant. Two things. Firstly, Laura and Catherine said that those numbers you gave, the 10, 20, 70 on the 70 on the execution, everything else for the getting ready for it. Those are just gut numbers, aren't they? They're just your feeling for it. You don't have an actual study for it, or do you?
Don't have a study, but it's more than a gut. So this is a question I ask the people that I work with. So this is based on mostly large enterprises, but I've also kind of in the mix thrown in some startups and some small to medium enterprises. And it's generally where, if you ask somebody as well, I also did some research on what is a learning designer. Most people think a learning designer does tasks that sit within the development phase. So they're the two bits of research. I always ask, what percentage do you spend on these different phases? And I've done some research into like the identity of the L&D professional. And so there's no like written study and controlled test, but it's, I would be confident to say that this is a common breakdown and this is global as well. So it's a really good measure, I would say.
Yeah, and it matches, by the way, my experience of doing the work, and also when I talk to people about it, and the amount of time is very much focused on execution rather than anything else. When we chatted beforehand about what we're going to cover, we were going to get to this point about, I don't know, 15 minutes ago, and have time to discuss other things as well. I want to get to the questions because we've got a bunch of really good questions, but I also want to give you an opportunity. We were going to talk quickly about evaluation. Do you want to mention that at all, or do you want to jump straight into the questions?
Evaluation, very underexplored, but there's some very, very bleeding edge cases which are very interesting. Maybe just as a spoiler, because we might talk a little bit more about this in the questions, but let me just give you like a headline where we are right now from my experience. So there are people, again, there's kind of low hanging fruit. So there's more learning designers are finding more time to write better evaluation with the help of ChatGPT / Copilot / whatever, the generic AI tools.
Yeah.
And so they are able to, I mean, just to put it super simply and to pick one example of one framework, they are able to input information about the training, input information about something like Kirkpatrick's, and very quickly get tailored questions, tailored timetable for putting them out. Now, that does not solve the nobody responds to my survey problem, but it solves an execution problem. I think so. There's that's your low hanging fruit. And then at the other end, there is experimentation happening. And again, this is an example. To go back to the point I made at the beginning, this is an example of the sorts of thing that's happening in organizations where the leadership is finding the time and the space and giving people explicit permission to experiment. And that's really, really important. But one use case, for example, in the evaluation phase is that AI is very good at semantic analysis of reading words, which opens up all sorts of interesting opportunities for L&D, I think. But one of the ways that it can be used, and it is being used, at least tested, is to use the example of sales calls. I have a sales training. And then AI analyzes my sales calls before the training, and then after the training, and then again a little bit later, and then again a little bit later. And it is reporting all the time. So you can imagine this kind of always on assessment on impact. So actually, did the way I speak change? Did the number of calls change? Did the sales change? Is able to triangulate this data and give always on feedback to me actually on my performance, but also data to the org. So you can imagine, I mean, maybe finally we're going to crack this wicked problem of being able to measure the impact. You know, I said before, the best rate of impact right now seems to be about 12%. That's a guess. It's self-reported from people on the ground. We don't know. And so maybe that's where the exciting stuff is, because that evaluation data then becomes the input for the analysis and the design, and we create this ecosystem. So yeah, that's the headline of what's happening right now, I think.
I also think that you know what you described there is absolutely right, and I've seen it happening. It's all down to the quality of the data. If you're dealing with salespeople and you've got the data, then you have, if it's being done online, you have probably thousands of hours of transcripts of recordings, which can be, as you say, analyzed by AI to pick out what are the key behaviors. And there are great case studies of people doing that and being able to show a real, proper, measurable difference in the metrics the business is already using. So if it's a customer center, it can say, and this was with HSBC, yeah, we train people, and whether it's onshore or offshore, the customer agents increased their quality measure by 10%, from about 86 to about 96%. That's a very substantial increase. And as you say, suddenly we're talking the data, the language of the business. Unfortunately, most of our work is not tracked or captured in the same way that conversations are captured. So that's a low-hanging fruit. Other things would be more difficult. I've tried to put all of the stuff we've dealt with so far in the left-hand box, so you can see there we've got next step is definitely follow Phil. That's a AI learning design bootcamp at the top there, and then underneath we've got the blog posts, we've got the Substack, all the other things that we've dealt with today. Let's jump into some questions. Andrew in the background is doing a great job of corralling them, and I'm going to just go to the top of the list that Andrew has corralled. Normally I would sort of put these into groups, thematic groups. There's just too much going on to do that, so I'm just going to hit you with a bunch of questions. This was the first one we had. Will AI replace instructional designers, content instructional designers?
Well, right now, absolutely not. I think this is, so I run this monthly bootcamp, and when L&D professionals come in, most of them are learning designers or content creators, however they identify. This is their biggest fear. It's like, I just really want to get to know my enemy, and how can I maybe become better than it? And I think, again, this is a narrative that we are given, and it's a reality. Let's not ignore the fact that people have already lost their jobs as a result of AI. It happens. One very quick example. There is, I will just say, a British telecommunications company, not very subtle, which has used transcripts from its call centers that it's gathered over decades to automate 90% of its call center staff. And 90% of those staff, I think, have been made redundant.
Wow.
And so these are, and there's 10% who stay behind to kind of manage the machine. I should say, though, just to go back to this very important point, that the impact of AI comes down to the humans. I think it was IKEA did exactly the same, but instead of, like, they retrained the 90%
Yes.
to be higher value, better paid, more fulfilled. People who wanted to do a different job were supported to
Yes.
do so, and now the organization is generating more profit and benefiting from AI. So humans are what decides. But yes, so sorry, the point I was making was
We started with the idea that
oh,
data
you're
could be
gonna lose,
captured in
yeah.
an organization. Yeah.
Got you. Sorry, yeah. So no, the headline is no. So what we do in the bootcamp is we ask AI to design us a course and or create some content, and what it comes back with is it's like, it varies from wildly terrible to downright bizarre. And so I think the number one message is that for now, at least, AI needs you. AI is built to be very compliant. Most AIs are built to be assistants, but think of them as an apprentice. They're often presented to us as like an expert or a professor or something. They're
Yes.
much closer to an apprentice. And so
Yes.
without you, for example, let's just take the example of writing objectives. I don't know, something boring but simple. If you just ask AI to write some learning objectives, maybe give it a bit of info about the course, the training, you'll get, literally, it works by giving you the most average approach.
Yes.
If you instruct AI not just what you want, but how you want it to be done, it becomes magical, because it's kind of scaling you. And that's where we are right now. And so the number one tip I would give to people is to become a really great structured prompter of AI. And there is actually, I don't know, Andrew, if you were able to find it, but there is a blog post on how to do this, like a framework for how to do it. It's called CIDI, C-I-D-I. We do it in the bootcamp. But what that requires you to do is to provide AI with context, with a set of instructions, some details, and then an input, maybe as an example. And it really helps you to understand how much AI relies on you and how it is your apprentice. It's not you. It's not going to take over you. I think in the future,
it's a really good point.
Yeah. Sorry.
Go on.
No, I was just going to say, I think in the future, like, things will change. But there's kind of this, and this is a point made by Ethan Mollick in his book. If you've not read it, it's really great. I think it's called Co-Intelligence, about how AI is going to impact humans. But he makes the point, which I agree with, which is that in this world where we increasingly work with AI, there's kind of an irony in that human expertise is going to become even more important. So the ability to feed in those instructions, to assess if what is coming out of the end is the best it can possibly be, to analyze the data that we're getting and understand how to improve the machine, is going to become the role of the human. And so there will be jobs where, like, these I don't want to say low value, but like low paid, more functional jobs like call centers that can be automated and perform better by AI. There's also very highly skilled jobs that can be performed better than AI. We have lots of research to show that reading scans when people have terminal illnesses is done better by AI, because it doesn't get tired, it's not stressed, it's not just an operation. And so it's interesting, but the future that we foresee is not one without humans. It's one where humans are supported, helped, augmented by the machine. So, I mean, let's see, that example of like the telecommunications company and IKEA, I think, really highlights that the direction it will go will depend. There are also a lot of leadership teams asking for the automation of learning design. So it's kind of depends on the humans.
We have something like 4 minutes left, and we have a long queue of questions. I'm going to throw them at you, and we're going to try to answer these questions in 30 seconds, which of course is impossible, but let's see how we go. Laurent asks, how can you use AI to improve interaction with learners? There's a host of ways you can do that. What would you suggest?
I mean, so many ways, but it's all very risky. But 30-second answer is your most powerful tool when it comes to interactions with learners is feedback. More is more with feedback, never with content. With feedback, more is more. So if you are able to train an AI to give more feedback, fantastic. If not, just use ChatGPT to create more feedback at every time the learner does something, and you'll feel value from that too.
I love that. A very specific one from Stevie Page. We create medical simulations. We're thinking about whether AI, or a large language model, I guess, could act as a health professional or patient. What's a good starting point to see if that would work, just to test it out?
Build a GPT, build a bot in in OpenAI.
Yep.
Sounds complicated, is much less so. And see, in there you would be able to input examples of real interactions, get it to learn, and then you would ask it to reproduce those, and you would test it by giving it different challenges. Anyone can do this. It's pretty fascinating. I'd encourage you to have a go because it makes you realize strengths and weaknesses of AI.
It's really powerful. And if you're not sure how to do it, just literally go to ChatGPT and ask, how do I create a GPT? That's what I did, and I'm taking it through it. Isla Cummings asks, I like the idea of ChatGPT helping with root cause analysis, but how safe is the company data? If we describe a company problem on an open platform, is there a risk?
Yes. So do not do that. I think anonymize data, speak in general terms, or push for enterprise versions of ChatGPT, Copilot, etc., which a lot of organizations have already done, and which is basically firewalled, so everything is safe, and then you can go to town.
I like that. And that reflects also other questions we've had around that, like from Joe around the same thing. Marco asks, right now it feels like everyone's trying to do his or her own thing with AI trying to discover potential. What would it take to create a reliable system we could learn and use as learning professionals? Do you have the answer, Phil?
Well, I'm, funnily enough, researching this right now. Yeah, so I'm working with L&D people on the ground to think about what would that look like if we were to take ownership of this and actually build our own LLM for that's fine-tuned, let's say, for L&D. What would that look like? And this is what we're going to see. We're going to see, at the moment, we have access to lots of generic AI models. We're going to see more and more LLMs built. We're already seeing them. The latest one is for education. Google's doing it, like Microsoft's doing it, lots of people are doing it. So fine-tuned models for specific scenarios. And I think there is an argument to be made that we should be making fine-tuned models for L&D to solve some of these wicked problems that we've been talking about, and enable us to do that like as well as possible and as quickly as possible. So TBC, but yes.
We haven't been able to answer all the questions. Look, thank you everybody for putting the questions in. I might, Phil, if it's okay with you, I might pass those over to you, and you can see if you could answer some of them on LinkedIn, and
Sure.
we can get through to people. We have 1 minute left. I always have my big clock. There's my big clock saying, "Hey, we've got 1 minute left." It's an app. It's called the Big Clock app, and there are so many final things to say. But I just want to say thank you to everybody in the room. Great contribution, great questions, great discussion. Please, you'll get the mail tomorrow, but you've got all those links on the left-hand side. Please click on all of them and get ready to go through. Of course, I've got to wrap up by saying big thank you to Dr. Philippa Hardman, Phil, for coming in and sharing very eloquently insight across a wide range of experience and data and research. Phil, where would you like to leave it? What's the final point you'd like to say to people as we move out?
I think just to not to be scared of AI, to cautiously experiment in ways that you are able to, but to focus on, I guess, two angles. One is think about the question, how can AI help me to automate some of the things that I'm doing? But primarily, and more importantly, how can it help me to augment, so to get better at the parts of the process that maybe at the moment I am not confident in or don't have time to do, and to focus, if you can, primarily on the analysis of the design more than the development. I think that's where you'll find most value.
I love it. I love it. And that's it's a great message for us to take away. I want to say a big thank you once again, everyone in the room. This has been the most valuable 1 hour session on AI and L&D I have been to, says Kerry.
Well,
Wow.
let's
Kerry,
get
I'm
that
not
on a
surprised.
hoodie. Yeah.
I'm not surprised. It's great chatting with Phil, and she shares very comfortably and easily what's a wide range of very complex ideas. So thank you so much, Phil. We are going to have to wrap up now. We've had people today from Australia, South Africa, from Canada, and more importantly, from North, South, East, and West London, which is always difficult to get all those people together. We fight like cats. So thanks everyone for coming together and being so collaborative. Phil, once again, thank you so much for everything you brought to us today. Thank you.
Thanks, Don. Thanks, Andrew. And thank you, everyone.
And thanks, Andrew, in the background. Absolutely. Thank you so much.